Hey everybody, welcome back to the Men of the Kingdom podcast. My name is Kyle. This is my co-host Aaron. If you're new to our channel, we want to say welcome. The purpose of all this is very simple. We want to help men live successful lives according to God's design. And if you're one of our faithful viewers, we want to say welcome back. We're super excited for this episode because we have a very special guest we are excited for you to check out. Aaron, why don't you introduce him?
Yeah, well, thanks, Kyle. And I just want to remind you guys, if you haven't already, please subscribe, like the show. If you find value, share it with another guy in your life who might find what we're talking about and our guest message tonight useful. I also just want to say thank you to all of our viewers. We crossed over 100 subscribers. We're up to almost 110. So thank you guys. We're humbled by your support. 100 people is a pretty decent audience, and we're just grateful that we have real people watching these videos. But we got a treat for all 100 of you guys tonight. We have a guest who's a speaker that I actually heard live. Shares a message on motivation, discipline, showing up. He shares how you can break down big dreams, big goals into day-to-day steps and day-to-day actions. So check this one out. I know you guys are going to like it. One of my favorite episodes we've done this year. Without further ado, check out this latest episode with Jamy Bechler. Welcome back, everybody, to the Men of the Kingdom podcast. My name's Aaron. This is my co-host, Kyle, and we are joined by a really special guest tonight. He wears many hats. He's a fellow podcast host himself. He is a leadership consultant, a motivational speaker, and someone who definitely lines up with our show and the mission of helping men live successful lives according to God's design. I am very excited to welcome Jamy Bechler to the Men of the Kingdom podcast. Jamy, thanks so much for being here.
Hey, I appreciate you having me, Aaron and Kyle. It's great to be on your show. Love what you guys are, what you're doing with this podcast. It's great and impacting a lot of people.
Yeah, of course. No, we appreciate that. And, we were talking a little bit before we started. You've been podcasting for 4 years. So we're babies in the podcasting game, but it's really cool that people like yourself, I'm sure you've had a lot of guests that you were like, wow, I'm surprised that person wanted to be on the show. And honestly, that's how I felt asking you. I heard you speak, you gave a great message, and I could tell that your values and the things you believed in aligned with what we, focus on here, which is just trying to share principles to help men succeed in all areas of life, according to God's design. So with that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, Jamy, for those people who don't know? Just a brief background. I know you kind of have a background in athletics, a little bit about what you've done in the past, what you're doing now, and maybe even a brief thing about what your vision is for the future.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And, just a real quick, brief synopsis of my resume, and we can go into this deeper if you want, but I essentially was a college athlete in a couple different sports. Then I was a college basketball coach for about 20 years. I was a high school athletic director for a couple years at a large high school in Indiana, a fifth largest gym in the world for basketball, won a lot of basketball state titles. So as a basketball guy, that was appealing to me. And then for the last 5 years, I've either been unemployed or self-employed, depending on the day. I've been an entrepreneur. I have a great boss or a great employee. I don't know which one it is sometimes, but I'm in business for myself. I do leadership consulting, work with sports teams primarily. I write some books, do podcasting. So that's kind of my resume in a nutshell. But ultimately, my purpose or what drives me is I truly want to help people be more positive, or to help people make a difference in this world. And I know that sounds so kumbaya-ish, or, it sounds so, all right, cliche. But I truly do. Like, I hate seeing when people argue about politics. I hate seeing when coaches are selfish and it's all about the X's and O's, or it's all about winning. I hate seeing when kids aren't having good role models. Like, that doesn't help our world. And I truly believe that you can change the world one person at a time. Like, I can't change the whole United States at one time, but I can change one person or help influence positively one person. And maybe that person can help influence someone else. And I know, once again, that sounds really deep, but that's why I do what I do. And we can probably get into that a little bit more, but as far as my vision, for the future, I want to keep doing that kind of stuff, whatever that is. So podcasting, you mentioned guests that I've had on the podcast, or me coming on your podcast. I look at it as if you're really serious about making a difference in the world in whatever way that is, whether you're a famous person or not a famous person, then you should want to get positive messages out there, because you never know who it's going to touch. Like, I have no idea who's going to listen to this tonight and might take one thing from it. They might not like the whole interview. They might be like, man, I just don't like that Bechler guy. But they might be like, I never heard something said that way, and I'm going to take that thing. You know, there was 29 minutes of stuff I didn't like, but that 1 minute, man, I really liked that thing that he said. Same way when I interview somebody, I never know who that's going to impact. And so that's what you're trying to do is just, hey, can I get something out there that maybe speaks to somebody else? And that's why I do it. That's why I write the books. When I do a podcast, when I do blog articles or write for somebody else or anything that I do, first of all, I'm normally writing to myself. Like, that's the stuff, like, I'm talking to myself a lot of times. So Aaron, when you saw me on stage and I'm talking to the coaches, I'm really talking to myself. That's the stuff that I want to say to myself. Now, my wife might say, well, maybe you should stop talking and start listening. Maybe you should start listening to yourself a little bit more.
Yeah.
But the stuff I'm putting out there, I hope it's good, but it's really speaking to me because it's the stuff that I need to hear. And I hope that other people need to hear it as well.
No doubt. So with that in mind, Jamy, I think the one thing I like about sports, we both grew up playing sports, and especially from a coach perspective, it's like, you need to work on this. And I notice in a lot of your content, you talk about adding value to other people, adding value to yourself. So what are some practical things, if you were just talking to me, talking to Aaron, the everyday guy, when you say adding value to other people, what does that look like? Because I think a lot of guys get kind of stuck in life where it's like, they kind of have this desire to do the things you're talking. They want to live a positive life, but they feel like, where do I begin? There's a million directions I could probably take it. So what are some practical things, either in your coaching experience or even now, where you're like, hey, these are the non-negotiable things you should be doing each day, or things you should implement in your life to start seeing change? I would be curious to hear, where does a guy start?
The very first place I would kind of start is the understanding of, you can't do everything, but you can do something. And so changing the world doesn't just mean changing the world like the 300 billion people or whatever it is. It means changing your world, changing the world around you in whatever way that you can influence it. You might not have a huge influence. You might not have the platform. I'm from Akron. Well, we don't have the platform LeBron James has. That doesn't mean that I can't make a difference to somebody, to my next door neighbor, or to the person I work with. We all have some sort of influence over somebody, and we can, or we can influence or help somebody along the way. We can add value, so to speak. We can add something to their life. It might be a positive remark. It might be a smile. It might be an encouraging word. But oftentimes we get hung up on, well, I can't do everything, or I can't do what my goal is. I can't change the world. Well, yeah, you can't change the big world, but you can change the small world around you. And sometimes we just don't do anything because we can't do everything. Well, we can do something. And so first of all, understanding that. Secondly, is also understanding that we don't know it all. We don't know it all. We don't understand where people are coming from. And that's a big issue in this world, whether you're scrolling through social media and you're seeing the way people interact with one another, or you're a coach with a player, or you're a teacher with a student, or you're a boss with an employee. You don't see things the way that each other, like, we don't all see things the same way sometimes. And so we have to understand that we have to see other people's point of views. We have to see other people's perspectives. We have to see more than just our tree. We have to see the whole forest, because if we can't see more than just our tree, we're never going to reach other people, and we're never going to have that impact or influence that we should have. So you ask for practical stuff. Well, I gave you some kind of ideals or ideas or deeper things there, or bigger picture things. But how do you greet people? Do you smile? Do you say an encouraging word? What kind of habits do you have? What are you doing the first time, you get out of bed? What are you doing with your social media? Are you responding to trolls? Are you responding to somebody that, hey, you don't like the president and he put out a tweet, so you're going to respond negatively to that, or you're going to respond to a family member that likes a certain team or likes a certain political person? you're going to respond negatively to them. Well, take a minute and think of, how is that going to look? How is that going to get me closer to my goals? What do I really want in this world? And the people watching this show, or the people listening to this show, I'm going to bet that they want to make a difference. I'm going to bet that they want to advance the kingdom. They want to be people who have maybe not huge legacies, but at least people that make a difference.
Yeah.
And so, is that thing you're putting on social media, is it worth it? Is, in the big scheme of things, in the big picture, is that what you want to be about? How do you treat people? That includes when you're driving a car, when you're behind the wheel of your car, how are you treating people?
Yeah.
And I will give you a very practical example. And I don't know if it was God reaching down and slapping me, but the other day I'm merging onto a freeway and some car doesn't get over, and they should have gotten over because no one was in the other lane, and they about ran me off the road. And so I honked the horn really, really long. Well, my son's in the back seat and he's like, Dad, why'd you honk your horn? And I said, well, because that guy didn't get over and he should have gotten over. But you know what? Then I thought afterwards, yeah, you know what? I'm right. He should have gotten over. Yeah, I blew the horn. Did that teach him a lesson? Well, it might have taught him a lesson, but what lesson did it teach my son?
Mm-hmm.
So now we have this a lot as leaders, or as people, as parents, whatever it is. We set the standard, but we're not always the standard. We need to not only set the standard, but we need to be the standard. And so I might tell him, hey, we've got to be nice to people. Hey, we've got to be patient. We've got to be calm. We've got to be poised. And then he sees Dad blowing his horn at somebody because someone didn't do what they were supposed to do. Well, so what? You know, he doesn't need to see that kind of an example from me. And so what are we presenting? What are we doing in our everyday life? And a lot of times it doesn't match up to what we want to be about, but we let our ego get in the way, or we just want to be right, or we're just frustrated with all the red lights, but we're not thankful or grateful for the green lights. You know, we get mad at all these little things that happen to us, but then we're not thankful for the good things that happen in our life. So just taking kind of that mentality of, is everything that I'm doing advancing me forward and advancing the people around me forward and helping us all get to where we want to get? And a lot of times it's probably, the answer is no, because we're probably letting our ego get in the way, or our agenda get in the way. I kind of went off on a soapbox there. Sorry about that.
That was
Kyle.
good.
No,
It's so true though. Cause like I experienced my own life, like we'll leave church and you're feeling uplifted. And then we live in the metro here, and then you get on a car situation, or even at a red light. Aaron and I always talk about this. We always say we will never be that guy who honks at someone who's at a red light. Maybe they're on their phone, they shouldn't be, but even for like 2 seconds, people are mad, they're honking their horn. It's like, man, here I am driving my own car. I'm going to the only place I want. Like there's people all over the world who don't even have anything like this. And I'm going to get upset over 3 seconds at a red light. It's just like, but to your point, Jamie, too, like that consistency. And I think it's easier over time if you can train yourself to, nope, I'm not going to react here. I'm not going to react here. And then in other areas of your life, you start noticing, you know what, that's not a big deal, or I react differently. So it's so true. And it's easier said than done, because when you're in that moment, it is the ego thing. It's like, oh, I'm going to get this guy, but it's like, you're not really changing anything. And you're just more so making yourself upset. And then for the next 20 minutes, you're upset over one little thing and it ruins your day. It's like, just doesn't make sense. So appreciate you going down the road there.
Yeah. When you were talking about that too, before you gave the example of the story of you and your son, and I was even convicted of this when you were speaking. So a few things. One, when you talked about how you speak to yourself, that's exactly how we feel with the podcast. And honestly, that voice, that kind of voice of fear, I believe that's the voice of the enemy, of trying to convince us, hey, who are you guys to get on and talk about living a successful life according to God's design? Like, I saw what you were just looking at on Instagram. I heard the way you just talked to your fiance. Like, I heard that argument you just had with your mom. Like, I heard you not give your coworker the time. So my question is you're talking about how we want to set the standard, but we have to be the standard. I think I noticed this in my life, just that disconnect of the man I want to be and the man I can fall into being when you're just not cognizant, or you're tired. You know, it's the end of the day, you're tired. My fiance calls me. She just got out of, hanging out with her friends. Maybe they're working out and she wants to have a great conversation and pray. All I want to do is just go to bed, or whatever it may be. So in your position as a coach, do you see that disconnect a lot from who people want to be and who they are? And my question is, how do you get that feedback of where you're currently at because a lot of times I think that's hard, right? Unless you're working with a coach or whatever. I mean, do you ask your friends? Do you ask your family? Like, how do you bridge that gap between this is a person I currently am, here's who I want to be? Like, where do you even start? Where do you get the baseline so that you know like where to stack those habits and what things to work on?
Yeah, it's a great point. It's not easy by any stretch of the imagination, but yes, you need a mentor, or you need a coach, or you need an accountability partner. You need something, whatever you want to call it. You need somebody that's maybe been where you're at, or maybe has a different perspective than you, or maybe can point out some things or gently nudge you in a different direction, whatever it is. I think about, some of the greatest athletes in history, in Usain Bolt, the sprinter. Nobody's ever run faster than him. He's the fastest man in the history of the world, yet he had a coach. Well, that coach didn't necessarily run faster than him, but that coach could see things in him and get things out of him that maybe Usain Bolt couldn't see on his own. You can't see the picture when you're inside the frame. Oftentimes we can't see things when we're so down in the muck and the mire and the mud. We just can't see things clearly. And even if things are going well, sometimes we can't see where we need to go. I was just driving through Chicago the other day, and it would be no different than you guys, if you went to Minneapolis or any place like that, any big city. But I'm in Chicago, and they have a couple of the tallest buildings in the world in Chicago. And I'm literally 2 blocks away from, I don't even know what the name of it is, but it used to be the Sears Tower. I don't know what it's called now. Okay. Literally 2 blocks away, and I cannot see the Sears Tower. This monstrosity of a building, and I can't see it because I'm so in the thick of things. I'm right in there. Mm-hmm. Sometimes you're so close to something, but you can't see it because there's all these other things blocking your view. So yes, we need a mentor. We need a coach. We need someone that can pour into us, someone that maybe can see some things that we can't see, whether that's your spouse, whether that's a coach, whoever it is. So you have to find somebody like that. And to me personally, I don't care who it is. You've got to find someone that you respect, that's not going to be a yes person, but also is not going to beat you down all the time. You got to find that happy balance. But you also need to be striving to be self-aware. And that's hard for us to do. Most of us aren't real self-aware. Most of us aren't able to honestly self-evaluate things in our lives and analyze where we're at and be honest with ourselves sometimes. And we need to strive to be more self-aware in our lives. That's not easy. I think it's more natural for some people than it is for others, but our ego gets in the way sometimes, and we want to shift the blame, or we want to shift responsibility, and we don't want to take it all on us. So we don't want to honestly evaluate ourselves. We don't want to analyze ourselves. We don't want to have self-awareness. One of my favorite shows is Shark Tank. And years ago, they had this entrepreneur come in, and this is a real thing that's in dressing rooms. It's called the skinny mirror. And she was pitching the sharks on the skinny mirror. And no joke, you go into a dressing room at a store, you try on clothes in front of the skinny mirror, and it makes you look skinnier. And so naturally, you like how you look. You buy the clothes because you like how the clothes made you look. Well, the clothes didn't make you look a certain way. It was the mirror that made you look a certain way. It distorts who you really are, but we liked what we saw. A lot of us go through lives with a lens of that skinny mirror. We don't want to actually honestly evaluate where we're at. We want people to tell us we're great. We want to have life be easy. We want to think that we're skinny when we're not. We want to think we're great when we're not necessarily great or where we need to be. And so we refuse to look at another mirror. And I don't have a real great answer on how you can do that, other than you have to constantly be telling yourself, hey, can I do better? You have to constantly have an attitude of growth and development and improvement to be coachable. Lots of coaches are not coachable. Lots of people are not coachable. They don't want to hear something negative. They don't want constructive criticism because they would rather be right than do what's right. They would rather be right than move forward. Most of us are too worried about who's right and who's wrong, as opposed to doing what's right. And that's a tough thing for us to swallow sometimes, as a coach, as a leader, as a parent, as a teacher, as a pastor. It shouldn't be about who's to blame for this. It shouldn't be fixated on blame or fixated on the problem. Sure, you have to acknowledge a problem, but it should be focused on solutions. We should be focused on moving people forward, moving ourselves forward. How can I be the best version of myself? And so, I threw out a lot there, but yes, you should have people, because it's so hard to be self-aware. You need another person to help unlock that, to help, unpack that, to help you get to where you need to be. That's what a coach is. They take you from where you are to where you need to be. That's why Usain Bolt, that's why LeBron James, that's why Michael Phelps, that's why the greatest athletes in the world have a coach. That's why a lot of these Fortune 500 people have a leadership coach or a life coach or somebody, to help them through the thick and thin, because they can't see things themselves sometimes.
Kind of on that note, Jamie, this is a kind of a near and dear question to my heart, because I have a few people in my life that I care about deeply, but all the people you name, like these athletes, or you work with executives now in the business world, they want to be there. They want to be coached. They want to improve. But sometimes I notice some people in my life that I see all this potential in. I'm having a challenge connecting with them or helping them see their full potential. And it just doesn't seem like they really want to change. Is there any advice you'd give me or other people listening to people they love, care about, want the best for, but it seems like those people are kind of indifferent or not wanting it for themselves, like these other athletes? Is there anything we can be doing to try to get through to these people somehow, to say, hey, you have a bright future, and yeah, maybe you've made some mistakes in the past, but I believe in you? And so I mean, that's a tough question, and it's a hard one because these are people we care about, but I just thought about that as you're saying it. I don't know if these people really want it for themselves. Maybe there's a little bit of that there, but how do you kind of break through to them? Is that possible at all?
Yeah. Aaron, when he introduced me, said I was a motivational speaker. Well, I sometimes motivate people. Mainly I motivate people that want to be motivated. Rarely, if my audience, Aaron, when you saw me speak, there were people in that audience that wanted to have nothing to do with my message of it starts with you. Mm-hmm. There were some people in there that didn't want to be motivated to make their programs or their cultures better because they want to blame it on their players. If they had a 500 record or a losing record last year, it's about them. It's the players' fault. The same way I was my first few years of coaching. It was always the players' fault. Players this, players that. And then eventually somebody said, you realize you're the common denominator. Every year you're saying the players this, the players that, but they come and go, but you're staying the same. So you're the common denominator in this equation. But the point of all that is, if you don't want to be motivated, you're not going to be motivated. So what you have to do is, yes, if somebody wants to be motivated and you feel like you found that person, then you can take a different tact with them. Then it's all about, hey, this is your potential. This is what you can do. And you're trying to get that out of them. If they don't want to be motivated, then what you need to do is you need to work on the relationship a little bit more. And a lot of times you might have a relationship with them, but you need to work on it even a little bit more, because what you don't have is you don't have the type of relationship and the type of influence with that person that makes them want to have what you have, that right. makes them want to see what you see for them. So you can't even get to that point of getting their potential out of them because they don't want to see it. They don't want to be motivated. They don't want to have what you think that they can have. So you need to work on that relationship. And that goes for anything with leadership or influence. You've got to have a relationship with people. And oftentimes we skip that.
Yeah.
A couple of years ago, I saw, and I'm the king of bad analogies or bad stories, but this fits in my mind, at least connecting the dots. A couple of years ago, I'm at a game, and they do the national anthem, and these kids these teenagers are goofing around, not taking it seriously. Well, there's a war veteran, there's an older gentleman, and he goes off on them. And you know what? He's probably 100% right. Those kids weren't being respectful. What he was saying was probably right. But the thing was, those kids didn't know him from anybody else, and they didn't take anything that he said. They just blew him off. They just continued to act a fool. They had some choice words for him because they didn't have a relationship. Then somebody else came over who they knew, and obviously they respected. They said something to these kids. and they apologized to the other guy and they had respect for at least the next 10 or 15 seconds. Oftentimes it's about a relationship. If we don't have a relationship with people, if we don't have that strong bond, we're going to have a hard time having a tough conversation with people. And so we have to develop a relationship. And if we have that relationship, we need to develop a better one than if they still don't seem like they want what we think that they can do, or want what we think they should want. We have to develop an even better relationship where they trust us even more implicitly. So the more you can make it about them, that you're not talking to them or you're not doing something for them just so you get something out of it, because so many of us are skeptical and we're cynical, because so many of us are selfish and so many of us are agenda based. And so we project that onto somebody else. Well, Kyle's just being nice to me because he wants something from me. Well,
Right.
I say that because that's how I go about life.
Yeah.
We project things on other people.
Yeah.
So as you try to build and go a relationship and go deeper with these people, yeah, you're maybe doing it because you want something for them that they don't want, but they've got to see that you're sincere and genuine. And then you got to keep doing it. You got to keep being consistent if you actually do care about them. And you know, that's that saying, you know, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Mhm.
I think it's a great saying. It's a great cliche, but what we forget sometimes is that it doesn't say people don't care how much we know until we care. It says people don't care how much we know until they know we care. They have to know that we care about them, not just that we care about them. They have to know that we care about them. And a lot of times we don't demonstrate that. We don't go overboard to demonstrate that we care about Kyle or we care about Aaron. And I really care about where you're at. And I care about you as a person. And, you know, until you get that relationship, you won't even be able to dive into what motivates them.
Right. Awesome. Thank you for Jamie for that. It kind of reminded me, we had a guest on a couple of weeks ago and it always stuck with me. It was something along the lines of what you say is not as important as what people hear type of thing. And it kind of goes back with, they need to know it. And sometimes we think we have this perfect message and we convey it, but it's like whatever that person hears, whether right or wrong on their part, that's what's most important. So I think to your point, you know, sometimes we try to help people so much because we do care, but if they don't feel like you care and that relationship isn't as deep as it should be, like you said, it's going to be hard to get through to them. So appreciate you sharing that. Got some notes on that and hopefully can work on that with those people that came to mind when asked the question. So
yeah, that's good stuff. What I was thinking too, Jamie, so you're talking more in the realm of just coaching, influencing. And what I want to try to do is kind of tie this to how this stuff is relevant in the faith walk, in a faith setting, right? I think all those principles remain true. I think it's very true that when you're trying to share the faith with someone of, hey, I want you to come to church, I want you to start reading the Bible, whatever those things are, people aren't going to listen to that, even if it's true, even if they're like, yeah, that could be true. There's some good advice in there. They don't want to hear that from people that don't love them, that don't care about them. So I thought that was awesome. I have a bunch of questions in that realm. I'll start with an easy one. So for those of you guys watching, Jamie is a John Maxwell certified leadership coach. John Maxwell is obviously, one of the most popular, well-known authors of our time. He's also a very godly man. My quick question for you, Jamie, is do you have any kind of key lessons? You obviously spent some time with John. We might even use that picture as the thumbnail. I think it'd be an awesome thumbnail picture for this episode. But what have you learned in terms of faith? Obviously, John Maxwell's got a ton of books about leadership, this and that, but specifically around faith and being a godly man, what have you learned from John?
Well, first of all, just let you know, I'm pretty sure John Maxwell does not know who I am. So even though I'm a certified leadership coach in the John Maxwell team, there's a number of us, and I'm pretty sure he would not know who I am. But I can tell you, when I met him, he was very gracious and acted like we were friends. So, which is not, to me, my point is not that you fake it, but the point is that when you make people feel good, when you make people feel like there's something, Kyle asked earlier about the adding value phrase. When you do that, you're adding value to a person. You're making them feel like they're important, whether they are or they aren't, because the reality is everybody has some significance. Everybody is a child of God. Everybody has some strengths. Everybody has potential. And so that's one thing that I've learned from John Maxwell over the years, whether he was teaching us, whether just reading his, 1.7 bajillion books that he writes. I think in the time we've had this podcast, he's probably churned out 2 books, published 2 books in this time. I mean, but what I've learned, one of the major things I've learned from him is that it's all about adding value to people, making people feel like they're important, because they are. He says success is essentially, one of the things he says is success is being the best you're capable of being. He's not the only one that's said that. John Wooden used to say that. But one thing he went further of that I'd never heard anyone else say was essentially significance is helping other people be the best that they're capable of being. Significance, when you live a life of significance, you're helping others be the best version of themselves. And you can't do that if you're looking down on people. The Reverend Jesse Jackson years ago, and I know not everybody likes Jesse Jackson, not everybody likes John Maxwell, not everybody likes a person I might quote, but the Reverend Jesse Jackson had a great quote that I think is so relevant when he said it, but also relevant today, is the only time you should look down on somebody is if you're picking them up. We should constantly be finding ways to uplift people, to pick people up, to help people feel like, hey, I am somebody, I can do something. And so when you talk about John Maxwell, obviously he's a man of faith. He was actually a pastor before he became this leadership guru, or known as a leadership guru. He was a pastor. He's a man of faith. And I think it's really hard to separate the two. I think I know there's people out there that have some great leadership insights, but are atheists, let's say. So I know there's people out there, but I think it's really hard to separate the two, because to be a true leader, you have to be a servant leader.
Yeah.
It's really, really hard to be a good leader if you're not a servant leader. And to be a servant leader, you have to have some kind of a faith, because it's really hard, because to serve someone else, that means that you're willing to be part of something bigger than yourself. And to be part of something bigger than yourself, you have to admit that there's something bigger out there to some degree. And so I really think it's hard to separate being a good leader from being a person of faith and looking to God. And that's some things that I've seen from John Maxwell. I'm a young kid, I'm a teenager, and I'm reading some of John Maxwell's books. So he's had a huge influence through the years on my life. He's the first person that I kind of learned about the leadership's not about positions or status or titles. It's about one person influencing another, becoming a person of influence. That's what leadership is. And that's where, most of my thoughts have come from him. Most of my good thoughts have come from somebody along the way. If I say something you don't like, it was probably an original thought.
I have a follow-up on that. And I thought that you did a great job. Well, first of all, that's the first time I've ever heard that John Maxwell was a pastor. So that's cool. And I would agree that it's interesting. I've always been into motivational speaking, leadership, all that. I'm newer to, fully giving my life to God. What I found is totally supports the claim you made that it's hard to separate the two. We were talking before the show, PJ Fleck, somebody that I really look up to. Great example, John Maxwell, Tony Robbins, all these people who are like icons, whether they're coaches, teachers, speakers, whatever, business leaders, they're all believers. And I didn't know that when I started following their work, or I said, hey, there's something different about them. But I found that to be true too. So totally agree with that a lot of times they kind of go hand in hand. But my question to you is, what role does your faith play in your coaching and your teaching? Kind of a two-part question. So that the first one. And then the second one is, how do you consult leaders who may not share the same faith beliefs? If you were working with a leader who just said, hey, I don't believe in God, how would you go about that? But first, I'm just curious, how does your faith kind of impact your teaching and your message?
Yeah, great questions. It's hard, like I said earlier, it's hard to separate leadership from faith to a degree. I know people do it. There have been people that do it. I think it's more difficult. It's already difficult enough to be a leader, but it's more difficult if you don't have that that foundation, that basis for who you are. And so when you ask, how does your faith impact what you do today? Sure, you can become a Christian and change your life overnight and make a difference overnight. But oftentimes it's a journey. Oftentimes it's a marathon. And so what I did as a 6-year-old, what I did as a 15-year-old, what I did as a 21-year-old, those things build on each other. Those life experiences through the years build on each other, and it builds habits. And it builds habits of not only what you do, but the habits of how you're thinking, how you see the world, your lens, your paradigm of how you see the world. I see the world as inherently flawed, but hopeful. There's hope. We as people should have hope, but we're flawed. People are not perfect. So I see problems in the world not as, oh, this is terrible, we're never going to recover from this, this is the worst thing, the world, it never been a worse time to be a human, the apocalypse is coming, the world's going to end. Okay, I see it as, all right, there's some challenges, there's some things that are happening that I don't like, there's some bad stuff, but I know that God's going to win in the end. I don't know when that's going to be, but I know he's going to win at the end. And I know we have hope because I know that I might not be able to change 350 million people's opinions in this country, but I might be able to help influence and make someone's life better that's outside walking around the lake or outside walking on the sidewalk or at my place of work, whatever that is. I can still, going back to what we said at the start, I can still try to add value and make a difference in their life. For me, if I don't have a God perspective on that, then I don't think I can do what I do as effectively. Mm-hmm. So it encompasses everything that I do. Now that plays though into your second part of that question. I am not a Christian leadership consultant. Mm-hmm. I don't discriminate. I don't only work with Christians. I don't only work with non-Christians. That has not one time in my 5 years of being in the consulting business, that's never come into play. And in terms of, I can't work with you because you don't believe the same way I do. Because almost always, invariably, if they're paying me money, if they're hiring me, then that says that they have a worldview, at least, that they want somebody to be better. They want to make a situation better. Now, they might not want to make it better so that other people profit. It might be so that they profit, but ultimately they're trying to motivate their employees or trying to motivate their athletes to be better people or to be better teammates so that the whole team can be better, so the coach can win more games, let's say. Well, that's a bad motive, let's say, or that's a bad agenda. But the way we go about that is actually could be helpful to those athletes. So I look at it as a chance to put my foot in the door, to get in the door, and to be able to help a teammate be a better teammate, be a better leader, an employee, be a better person in some respects. If I can help a person, if I can help Aaron show up for work on time or be more motivated to show up for work on time, well, he might show up for church on time. He might show up for that his son or daughter's performance at school on time. One of the things I said at that conference that you went to, Aaron, was how you do anything is how you do everything. And I really believe that for the most part, our habits become all encompassing, and who we are in one area probably is who we are in another area for the most part. Obviously, there's always exceptions to every rule. So I feel like, hey, if I can go in somewhere and just help somebody be a little bit better, that might help them in other areas as well. So, but I'm not sure I would have been a good coach. I'm not sure I'm a good leadership consultant if I don't have that faith, if I don't have, that belief in Christ and the understanding that, hey, things aren't always going to go the way they should, but I have hope.
I think that's important too. I think you can fall into two pits where some people are of faith and they try to wall themselves off against the world or anything to that effect. But we're called to go out there and be with those people just like Jesus did. He walked among sinners and people who were down and out. And I think it's a good opportunity as we go about our jobs or whatever your calling is, whether you're a leadership coach or you're in marketing field like us, like every day we go out, add value, like you said, to people. It's an opportunity to love people well and make people wonder who is like, dang, what's different about this guy? And so I think that's important too. You're in a very unique role where you are around a lot of people all the time, and your job is to try to motivate them and get the best out of them. So I think it's cool that you get that opportunity.
Well, and let me piggyback on that, Kyle. And I'm sure that I have turned off people along the way because I am definitely flawed, and I definitely have my weaknesses. But often there's a lot of times, like, I don't mention Christ when I'm on stage. I don't tell people, hey, I belong to this church. I don't go out there and overtly preach. I'm not an evangelist. I'm not a pastor. But there's been a lot of people that will naturally assume, hey, you're a Christian, or they'll be like you guys having me on your podcast. You know, this is a Christian podcast. I didn't say on stage when I talked to Aaron, and it's not in my bio that I'm a believer in Christ. It's not in my social media profile. So my hope is that people will see the way I act or see the things I say, and they'll make that connection. But oftentimes we're going to be the only Bible that people read. And I know that's cliche, but I might be the only Christian that so-and-so knows. And once they feel like, or maybe they don't even know I'm a Christian, but they'll be like, man, there's just something about Jamy. There's just something different about Kyle. There's just something different about Aaron. I can't put my finger on it. And maybe they watch you a little more closely. And maybe they come to figure out, hey, you go to church. That's probably what's different. Or maybe they just come up and ask you, you know, Aaron, why are you so different? Or you do this, you know, that surprised me. Why you do that? Well, it's because I'm a Christian. Okay, but you might be the only Bible that people read. And so your life should be as consistent as possible. And even if you're not preaching, well, you can still live a life that is a strong witness and a strong testimony. You know, maybe you've heard the saying or the cliche, what you do speaks so loudly, I can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah.
You know, and that's how we should be living, whether we're being overtly Christian or not. And a lot of times we see on social media, people are more worried about, you know, the issues of a Republican Party or a Democrat Party, or they're more concerned about their sports team than they are being a good representation of Christ. And that should be the number one team we're on. But oftentimes we get so sidetracked by other issues and other things that people are like, oh, you know, if that's what a Christian's all about, I don't, you know, he's no different than me.
Yeah, 100%. It kind of goes back to what you said with your son in the car with the people cutting you off. It's like people watch your actions, especially as believers. We are called to a high standard. And so when you're out there doing things that don't align with what you believe, and of course we fail and we slip up, of course. But like you said, I've never heard it put that way, that we might be the only Bible people read. It does put in perspective, like, hey, you might be the only contact that someone comes into, and people are watching closely. And so, you know, it's just like being a leader too. Like you have a standard you have to live up to. And of course you fail at times, but people are looking to you for guidance in that respect. So I know you have a bunch of questions. I think that's cool. I like that. I've never heard that before. I really like that.
Yeah, I like that a lot too. Yeah. And even when you think of like people that we look up to in the faith, it's not because they're perfect or they have all the right answers or they're this or that. It's just that, like you said, they live the example. They imperfectly live the example and consistently. Okay, so transitioning a little bit to a slightly different kind of topic, but I think it's still around the realm of faith, because I know that a lot of guys watching our show, like you said, they want to make a difference. Another pattern that we've noticed is these are guys that they want to do more. They might have full-time jobs. Kyle and I, we have full-time jobs, kind of 9 to 5, so to speak. A big reason we do this podcast, we feel like we have a bigger calling. We have gifts that we want to use. Yes, we want to love people at work. We want to disciple people at work. We want to show up, do a great job, add value in the workplace. But my question to you, Jamy, you said that, you know, now you're self-employed or unemployed, depending on the day. That was funny, by the way. But my question to you is, what advice would you give younger men who are watching this who have ambitions, or they might feel a calling that God's put on their heart to pursue a less normal career, not a 9 to 5. Like they want to do, they say, hey man, Jamie's so cool, I want to write a book. Or, hey, Kyle and Aaron are so cool. Or, hey, if Kyle and Aaron can do a podcast, man, anyone can do a podcast. So whatever it may be, what advice would you give those guys that say they want to do something different that's not just your typical go to college, get a job? What would you say to those dudes watching this?
Yeah, first of all, don't compare yourself to others like from a scoreboard standpoint. You can compare yourself to others to learn from them, but don't ever compare yourself to, you mentioned Tony Robbins earlier. Well, if you're a speaker and you compare yourself to Tony Robbins, there's probably like 3 people in the history of the world that would compare favorably to Tony Robbins. You're going to fall short. I mean, he's the man. I mean, he's absolutely incredible when it comes to speaking. You know, he could sell ice to Eskimos or sell a ketchup popsicle to a lady wearing white gloves. I don't know. I mean,
that one's from you, isn't it? You came up with that one.
Yeah, because it's bad. It's bad, isn't it? See, you're catching on. If it's bad, you know that I'm the one that came up with it. But yeah, don't compare yourself to others because you're going to fall short almost always. You know, compare yourself so that you can learn from others. You know, hey, this person's here. Well, I want to be where they're at, but this is how they got to that point. You know, sometimes it takes 15 years to be an overnight sensation, you know, but what we do is we compare our real life to other people's highlight films, and we just can't be doing that. So number one, if you're out there listening and you want to do something else or want to do something unique or something creative or something that's not the typical 9 to 5, look to others, look to people that are doing it, look to people that have done creative things to learn from them, but not to compare. It's not a comparison game. The other thing is, and I've mentioned this a couple of times, you can't do everything, but you can do something. And you just mentioned writing a book. I don't know how many years, 20 years maybe, I went between I wanted to write a book to I actually wrote the book. And I kept shooting myself in the foot. I was my worst enemy, my worst critic. I can't write a book. I hated English class. I told the English teacher, when are we ever going to need to know this stuff? You know, I'm not a particularly great writer. Well, I'll never write a great book. I don't have time. So I kept sabotaging myself. You can't do everything that you want to do, but you can do something. Don't sabotage yourself. Get started. Do something. All right. Writing is easy. Now, there's a lot of people out there that are like, wait, what did he just say? And you're rewinding that. What, writing is easy? Yeah, writing is easy. Now, rewriting is hard. The editing process might be a little bit harder, but we never get to that point because we just don't write. Just thinking, write a book, write your thoughts down, get a book. And most of us, our first book's not going to be any good anyways. And no one reads anymore. So don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. Just like when I speak, people are scared to public speak. Well, you shouldn't be, because half of the people aren't paying attention and the other half are sleeping. So it's not a big deal. No one cares what you're doing up there on stage. They're not paying attention. So don't sabotage yourself. The third thing I would say, so one is don't compare, or compare, but only to learn from others. Secondly, don't sabotage yourself. Don't tell yourself what you can't do. Well, what can you do? There's always something you can do. It might not be where you want to end up, but you can start baby steps. You know, a year from now, you'll wish you started today. You know, do something now, you know, get started. And then the third thing would be, you don't have to jump. It kind of goes into the, you can't do everything, but you can do something, but you don't have to jump both feet into the deep end at one time. Be an apprentice, be an intern, so to speak, be a graduate assistant, so to speak. Make it a hobby, do something on the side, start off small, learn some of the tricks of the trade, get a mentor before you quit your job. I know it's a big deal nowadays, especially in people that start their own businesses. Sometimes I can't say that word, the entrepreneurial spirit or whatever. That's a buzzword. People like to do that. But kind of the cool thing is, well, I just quit my job and I jumped right into something. Well, you have bills to pay. You have people to support sometimes. Sometimes it's just not smart. Learn some of the tricks of the trade while you're making money. Learn that stuff so when you make that transition. So those are just a couple pieces of advice for whatever they're worth.
I just have one more.
Yeah, it's good to go ahead.
What time does it end? 15?
No, we got a little bit of time.
Okay. So last question for me, Jamie. You kind of touched on a few of them, like the comparing yourself. I think a lot of times in life we say, okay, these are the things you should do. But working with leaders, working with athletes, especially pretty successful people who are already in a good position of leadership, are there any character traits or things you see people do before their downfall? We hear in the Bible talks about pride comes before the fall. And I think comparing could be one of those things, but I'm thinking more people who've already made it, they're feeling good, they're at where they want to be. What are those things you see, whether character traits or actions people take before they fall away from good leadership or really put themselves in bad position? Are there things people should avoid or things you've seen people do where like, hey, if you're doing these things, you better check yourself, even if you feel like you're at a good spot? I'm just curious. I don't think people focus on some of the things you shouldn't do as well.
Yeah, you just rest on your laurels. Whatever that is, you become a fat cat in some way. You've made it and you forget what it took to get to that point. You kind of coast, or you kind of you put it on cruise control. And when we talk to teams all the time, or even coaches, but when we talk with programs, with teams, we tell them there's no such thing as a teammate that's in the middle. There's no such thing as a teammate or a leader that's just in the middle or stays where they're at. You're either getting better or you're getting worse. Now, it might be in increments, it might be slow and gradual, but you're either making things better or you're making things worse. You're either, as an athlete, getting better or you're not getting better. That sounds simple, but I 100% believe that. And so oftentimes what happens is we maybe experience success, or maybe we get to a point that we wanted to get to, and then we don't reevaluate. We don't then set different goals. I've reached my goal. There's a businessman who does a lot of speaking, podcasting. His name's Gary Vaynerchuk, Gary V. Well, Gary V will talk about, will sometimes criticize these people that'll say, yeah, I want to make $1 million within 5 years, or I want to, do X within X. And he's like, well, you're limiting yourself. Why? That's a random number. Why that number? Or what happens if you get to it too quick? Do you reevaluate your goal? Or maybe that goal was too bad, wasn't high enough, or whatever. Oftentimes we maybe reach a goal, we reach some plateau, we reach some sort of success, and then we don't then up our game. We don't raise the level of our game. And so then we invariably fall back a little bit, or we forget what it took to get there. We talk with sports teams all the time about fighting daily for your culture. You'll see these teams and you'll see them, they experience a lot of success over 3, 4, 5 years. And then all of a sudden they go down the tubes a little bit. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's a gradual process. And before you know it, the coach is fired. Well, he won a Super Bowl, or he won a World Series or a championship 5 years ago. Yeah, well, he let the culture slide. He stopped fighting every day for that culture. And so if you're a husband, if you're a father, if you're a business person, if you're a coach, whoever you are, you've got to fight every day for what's most important. And then, and when you have a good day, when everything seems to be going your way, you know what? Great. Celebrate that success. But then the next day, fight to get that success again, fight to achieve that goal, fight for what's most important to you.
Yeah. Like it. Thank you.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of what you're talking about is consistency, which is so hard. Even the guys watching this, it's like the people who might be in terrible situations or whatever the case may be, they could probably sit down and come up with a list of all the things they should be doing. It's not rocket science. Wake up early, work hard, take care of your body, treat people well. All those things are easy on paper, just hard to do in practicality. But okay, I've got a million questions for you, Jamie. I know you've got a wife and a beautiful son, and I don't want to take you all night. So I'm going to hit you with the one last question, and then maybe some final thoughts. But you've talked a lot about, and obviously the profession that you're in, where you're coaching coaches, just practically, you're coaching, say coaches, we're in Minnesota at the University of Minnesota. say PJ Fleck hires you, says, hey, Jamy, we kind of look alike. I want you to coach me. I want you to help me win more football games. So it's great if you help PJ become a more godly man, become a more aligned man spiritually. At the end of the day, PJ is going to be judged by wins and losses, right? That's just what happens, the reality with coaches. So Kyle and I, we're business people. You're a business guy. How do we blend earning man's approval with also balancing living with godly principles, living according to God's, economy, storing our riches in heaven, things like that? How do you kind of blend those two worlds? Because, like it or not, we are judged by our performance on this earth, but we're also serving, an eternal kingdom and things like that. So just curious what your take would be on that and how guys can kind of merge those two together.
Well, integrity is not situational, and your faith shouldn't be situational. So if you are a person of faith, then you gonna remember that. I mean, why does it matter? I know why it matters, why you keep your job and you make money and you get wins like PJ Fleck. You get wins, you keep your job, you support your family. But at the end of the day, all that stuff's going away. So what is most important to you? Now, as a Christian, as a person of faith, you want to do everything well. You don't want to just go through it with half effort, but integrity, your faith is not situational. I would say, and not everybody agrees with me on this, but I would say that you've got to let the wins and losses take care of themselves. Like you've got to let the bottom line, quarter one, quarter two, if you're a business person, you've got to let the profits take care of themselves as long as you're doing what you're supposed to do. If you're competent in that job. Now we got to be competent. We can't say, well, I don't need to do my job well because I'm a Christian and it doesn't matter. No, it matters because people are watching you. It matters because other people are relying on you to provide for their families as well. So you have to be competent in what you're doing. That's a spiritual responsibility you have as a man of God. So you can't just say it doesn't matter, but it matters to the point that you've still got to be competent and do what you're supposed to do. But I would say in the coaching business, even if you're the most Machiavellian coach, the Machiavellian leader, even if you're all in it for yourself, when you treat people good and you inspire people, even if you're just trying to get your next paycheck or win more games, you need to still treat people well and inspire them, because inspired athletes are the ones that win you games. Inspired employees are the ones that make better quality products, that do better with the service industry. If you're in sales, even if you're trying to get more sales and you don't care about your people, you still have to inspire your people. Inspired salespeople, inspired workers will still make your company better. So even at the most evil Machiavellian motives, you still should be treating people well and inspiring people. And a lot of people don't even do that. But I think, that's a ridiculous way to live. I think you should be treating people well because that's what we're called to do. That's just the right thing to do. It's always the right time to do the right thing. I mean, Martin Luther King said that. That was pretty good. I tell my son that all the time and he rolls his eyes. He's like, I know. Martin Luther King Day. I said, what do you know about Martin Luther King, Jalen? He's like, well, we get off school. I'm like, yeah, good job.
It's hilarious. It's fun. All right, Jamy. Well, I want to wrap this up here. My last final question. We've covered a lot of ground. Guys, watching this, I hope you enjoyed it as much as Kyle and I did. This has been great. You've covered a ton of different topics. And kudos to you. I'll just say that when I heard you speak, you didn't overtly say, hey, I'm a man of God, I'm a Christian, but you didn't have to, right? Your energy, the messages you were sharing, the servant leadership, all those things. I pulled that from your message without you having to say it. And guys watching this, I hope that you take that. I know I've taken that message. I have some work to do. I have some reflecting to do to ask myself, am I showing up like that? Am I somebody that, like Jamy, when I go to work, if I'm sitting in a boardroom, do people know by the way I'm acting what I believe in? If people saw me day to day, what would they think about who I believe in, the God we serve? So Jamy, kudos to you that on that day and that morning, you were showing up well and, inspiring to us. And I hope the same for our audience. So we covered all this ground. Pretend that I'm a viewer watching this. I have a little sticky note. I have Jamy at the top. I have takeaways, what are the things that you would extract from this podcast to say, all right, Jamy Bechler's top tips to help you be a more godly man, somebody who's following your calling, someone who's going to take the best of what you have to offer and wake up in the morning and say, okay, this is my to-do list. I'm going to start implementing. What are those small things that they can start doing tomorrow from everything that we've covered in this episode?
The very first thing I would say is understanding, and we didn't really dive into this deep, but I mentioned it, is that anyone can be a leader. You don't have to be the boss. You don't have to be the head coach. You don't have to be X, Y, or Z. It's not about status, authority, positions, flow chart. It's about your influence. It's about influencing others in a positive way. And you don't influence others. So leaders are just influencers, but you don't influence others unless you have a relationship. Everybody is in the relationship business. It doesn't matter if you're unemployed, self-employed, you work for the man, it doesn't matter. You are in the relationship business. You cannot influence a couple punk teenagers to be respectful for the national anthem if you don't have a relationship with them. You can't influence someone to become a Christian just by being smarter than them or quoting scripture to them or telling them X, Y, or Z, even if it's the facts and the truth. You will not get someone to church unless you have a relationship with them. You can't be a leader unless you have positive influence, and you can't have positive influence unless you have relationships with people.
Good. That's awesome. Well, again, Jamy, you've motivated us. You've inspired us here. We're going to wake up tomorrow. We're going to kind of unpack all this. And that's just my prayer for any of you guys watching this, for us three, that we just be able to pour into people. Would we care enough to get to know people, listen to Jamie's message, build great relationships? And hey, we can't do everything, but we can do something, as a wise man once said. So that's where we'll leave it here tonight, you guys. Again, Jamy, thank you for the time. Be sure to tell Tabitha that we appreciate her letting you spend an hour with our audience. It's going to be an impactful episode. And guys, if you stuck with us this whole time, we hope you love this episode. And as always, until next time, keep advancing the kingdom.